Hi, my name's Nick, and I'm an Ableton addict. I've been using Ableton since Live 4, and I just can't stop. I've come here today to try and share with you why it's such a big problem for me. And my alter ego, Nick Matthews, is here as well. Thanks very much for having me this evening. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and it's an honor to have your audience this evening, and I would like to show you a couple of things that I do with Ableton when I'm on stage. You can see me on stage tomorrow night, as a matter of fact, as DJ Invisible at Fiction. So if you don't hate me, then maybe you should like my website. But on to more serious things. So I've come here this evening to show you guys what I do with Ableton on stage. Now, that's a relatively complicated sort of subject to broach, and there's many ways that you can do this. And I wanted to try and maybe start with a little bit of like a personal history lesson, because I've been using Ableton for a hell of a long time, way before all of this cool APC stuff started happening with peer-to-peer kind of relationships with software to hardware, which has really advanced the whole way of you being able to actually manipulate the software, because as I'm sure that you've seen, many people have challenged with the mouse, and it doesn't a very musical kind of thing to use to actually get that sort of, you know, what you're trying to put inside your head out into a piece of gear. I first discovered the APC-40 actually when I was at Sonar in 2009 when they just released it, and I was like, wow, this is amazing, because I've been looking for things like this the whole time that I can you know, trigger my sequences and samples together, and it really is a breakthrough, because in a way, you know, it becomes something more tactile than just something that you see on a screen. And it's easy for people to sit here and talk ad nauseum about, you know, what they can do with it, but at the end of the day, it's about what you can actually find in the software within your own application, and messing around with it that's really going to give you your own experience. And that's the only way that I've really been able to get to the point that I am right now, which is through experience, through messing up and trying again. So, you know, like, the life is a lesson in itself. So if you can continue to be inspired by the things that you do within music, that's really what's going to get you to go to the next level of development in your career, whether it be just on a creative level or if you want to take this on a professional level. So, moving on to how I applied this in live, in the sense of actually being on stage, was that I was at the time involved with a lot of different live acts. I was working with a band called the Brilliant Project, I was working with Coda, which was a string outfit with violinists and classical musicians, and then I got involved with Gazelle, which was like an Afro-funk extravaganza where we had like 16 people on stage, and it was like, okay, how the hell am I going to link this all together? Now, I've got like a basic setup here. I'm going to go to a little bit more of an intricate live setup now. There was a question that was actually asked earlier, and it's going to be answered quite interestingly in what I was doing with the band, because you have this scenario where you've got like your track, and it's basically got a whole lot of different sounds. Now, you can either approach the scenario as a DJ kind of esque style, where you have one song and then you can, you know, play on top of that, which is what I do actually, is more on a solo performance level, because I don't have my hands to be able to play a keyboard and to touch buttons at the same time. So that's a little bit more simpler. But at the time when I was playing with the band, I had this kind of setup going, which you can see is a lot more detailed. And what I did is I took the tracks and I broke them down into their separate parts, which was kind of quite easy. Fundamentally, it's drums, bass, chords, guitars, effects, backing vocals. That's kind of how I wrote it up. And it was a bit, you know, I kind of worked around between 6 and 8 channels per song. Then what I did was I really gave my sound engineer a hard time. And I said to him, okay, what I want to do is I want to make it go into a whole bunch of separate channels. So what I did is I put together these little buses over here. As you can see, they're through channels. Now, what I mean by a through channel is that it allows you to send whatever's going from one channel through that channel, so that it essentially allows you to group a whole bunch of different tracks together. It's kind of like what you could call a bus in mixed engineering terms. And then what I would do is I would send those to my external outs. In this case, I'm just sending it through stereo 1 and 2 out. But what I did with the sound engineers over here, I go, external out for bus 1 would be 1 and 2, or just 1, depending if it's mono or stereo. And then what would happen on the sound engineer's side is that he would have, on his mixer, he'd have drums, bass, chords, keys, and he could mix the front of house sound as well as with the rest of the band. The benefit of this being is that when you're playing with a whole bunch of dudes on stage, you know, there's tones, there's frequencies, there's sounds that are not going to mix all the time really well, and it's much better in a live environment for the sound engineer in front of house to tweak that for you. The challenge being is once you've given all these separate stems to the sound engineer, how are you going to monitor yourself on stage, which is a huge challenge for me, but we actually came with quite simply. But what we did is, okay, what I mean by that, okay, now imagine you're standing on stage. You say this poor sound engineer on the side of the monitor engineer, these 6 different signals, and he's going to try and balance it all together for you and put it through your monitor. You're going to land up killing the poor guy. Okay, so what I did is, I put together an auxiliary channel where I did a mix of all of the tracks together, and then I sent that out through another output on my desk. So essentially what was happening over here on my sound card is that all 8 channels were being consumed. All 8 outputs were doing all different things. It all came together now with how you put these electronic sounds with a band. You can't really send out the metronome, because that's not really going to help anybody. So what we did is we decided to send the metronome to one specific individual in the band, who was the drummer. So now if the drummer's got the metronome feeding through another out on your sound card, going to a mixer on the stage where he's got his controls, he can hear the click. He listens to the click, listens to the backtrack, starts drumming to the track, and everybody will naturally fall into the rhythm of the drummer. So to kind of help a long story short, there's 100,000 different ways at any given second in time that you can actually put this mix together. This is just how I did it, and I'm sure that you can guys, depending on the music that you guys are making, can find different ways to do it yourselves. Now there was another question that was really interesting this evening, which was with regards to how you make something happen later, even though you started triggering it at the beginning of the track. So what I did here is I created a couple of, something that I made up myself, which was called a ghost node. So you can see on the setup here on the first track, where my mouse is, it says ghost. Now what I did there is I just used an audio sample, and using the follow-on action, I actually caused it to follow on to the next sound or to the next, into the next 2 sections, depending on how long it's going to take for that clip to eventually start. And all I did was I pulled down the volume of the clip itself so that it actually didn't produce any volume. So it just kind of landed up being a spacer. Now I'll just try and put that into action for you. So if I was starting here, audio will be coming from over here somewhere along the line. Okay. Ooh. So you can see that the follow-on clip is happening, but nothing's really going on here at the moment. Okay. So you can see it's actually still waiting for it to come in. And now obviously the drummer's playing, he's kicking it off, things are going, bass line's playing. So now it happened to go through to the second ghost clip. Now the reason why I've done that as well is because I've got these in different sections. As you'll see, like if I don't let anything change, it'll eventually get to the point where all of these clips are playing in unison in one scene. Now this is quite important because if I want to change between scenes on the fly, it means that it will recalibrate, in scenes. So if I start from the very top, it's probably going to take 32 or maybe even more bars to come in. But let's say that I don't want to use the first 16 bars, I only use the second 16 bars, and this goes, obviously, as you can see, there's also 16 bars. So we've gone through 32 bars there, and now it's eventually gone to the chord section. Does this make any sense to you guys, yeah? Cool. Now the fundamentals of that is that you don't have to actually press play on the note for it eventually to start happening. The benefit also is for your mix is that you can get a separate sense to the sound engineer so that you can balance your mix out on the live stage a bit better. Look, at the end of the day, guys, what I'm doing here right now is fucking complicated, okay? For anybody to do on stage live, okay? This is really like extreme shit, I went to the maximum of what I could possibly push out in a live show. So I wouldn't intend to suggest to you guys that this is the best way to do something, but in terms of like the technical principle of applying Ableton into a live performance scenario, the fundamentals that you could find out of this are actually quite interesting, and it will allow you to actually broaden your scopes of what you do on stage. It'll actually alleviate your hands from having to do a whole lot of button pushing, which I find also a little bit annoying sometimes when you're particularly trying to get a great sound out of your performance, and allow the software itself to work towards its capability. Look, what I did further obviously is that you can see that every track, in the set is kind of laid out. So going further and further into, the set itself, you can see how, like, there's some sort of continuity. And what I did as well is I broke down the tracks into their separate sections. So, like, for example, here you can see that there's a chorus. Now, there's a reason why I was going so fast there as well, is because if you can see on the far right-hand side where the scene launch selection is, it says, I'm going to point with my mouse over there, it says 97 BPM. Now let's say that you're going between tracks, from track to track. One track is super fast and the next track is super slow. What I would do is I would use the scene launch to start the beginning of the track. And what I mean by scene launch is, obviously you see it on the side here, this is this sort of special clip, let's call it like that. If you press this special clip, it will trigger all the clips that are in that particular scene, okay? Just to make sure that you understand what I mean. The added benefit now is if I put BPM behind a number, it automatically references that as a BPM change on your global tempo, okay? So you'll see that it was playing really fast. It was playing actually at the tempo, let's say, okay, here, 122. Now all of a sudden I'll automatically want to jump it through to 97 BPM. It'll automatically change to the tempo, and you can see that tempo change happening over here on the top left hand side. That's your global tempo control. What else can I tell you that's really boring about this one? Look, as I said, it gets heavy complex. What I did here is I went ad nauseum into the tracks so that I could allow myself the flexibility to change between verses and choruses when on the fly when I decided to. You don't really need to go to the maximum, and I would suggest, as I say, trying to keep things simple rather than more complicated. But if you want to, like as I created here, I could change the builds. Let's just get to my tempo right there. See, I put a little tempo change control before any clips were started as well, so that at least if I get into the track, I can have the tempo already set before I get going. Now, this whole tempo story that I keep going on about, okay, let's just get a little bit deeper into that, because when we were like a band and we were just playing tunes and jamming, we never knew what tempo we were playing at. But as John was trying to get deeper into, is that there needs to be this kind of merge between electronic and acoustic music, and you need to find what's going to sort of get that to work together. What's going to make the machines talk, what's going to make the machines talk to the band, and what's going to make the band vibe off the machines. So it really is a balance of trying to get that whole clock sync story to come together. And I've got a little setup here which is kind of cool. I've got this MPK Mini, which is the same thing that John had, and I'm also going to actually just briefly glaze over the editor, because I think that this is something that people might sort of get you guys a little bit more sort of involved in the toys, as so to speak. So the nice thing about this MPK is that it's got a little arpeggiator on it as well, which I'm also going to jam with you guys just now. Now, the nice thing about it is that I can actually sync the clock of the arc to external. Now, what does that mean? Okay, that means that Ableton is the controller of your global quantized, your global MIDI clock. Okay, it can either be a master or a slave, and you can actually set that up by, on the top left here, you see it says EXT, which means external source of MIDI clock. Now, what is a MIDI clock? Essentially, it's that beep, boop, 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 but in MIDI signals. It allows you to sync a whole bunch of things together. For example, what I've done is I've synced up this core K oscillator to the tempo, or essentially to run as an external synchronizer, or sorry, slave to Ableton. So if I have, like, for example, an effect going, it will affect in time with how the audio is going, or sorry, in time with the tempo that we're using at the time. So let me show you something that's going to give you a little bit more of an idea of what I'm talking about here. So drum beats and some volume. Okay. can hear obviously the arpeggiators working completely in time with the beat. So this is MIDI syncing. This is another thing obviously that helps you a lot with live. So particularly with effects and stuff like that. When Ableton is using its onboard effects and it says synchronization, it's syncing to this global time as well. So it's one of those things that allows you to get rhythm and effect and feeling, whatever you're doing that is in synchronization with your global clock. Just gonna make a little loop and jump around a bit. Story that I was talking about. So now let's have a listen to quickly what we can do with the MPK syncing also to the clock with Ableton. Okay.